There are moments in life when a small, seemingly insignificant detail suddenly clicks into place, revealing a much larger, more sinister picture. For me, that moment arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, not with a dramatic phone call or a hushed confession, but with a flyer. Yes, a simple, glossy piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper, promising something almost too good to be true. And you know how that goes, right? Usually it is just junk mail, quickly discarded and forgotten. But this time, this one piece of paper, it was the first thread in a much larger, darker tapestry of deception that was quietly, insidiously, unraveling lives right here in our community. I remember the sun glinting off the polished surface of my car as I pulled it free. The headline, bold and authoritative, proclaimed guaranteed returns on your investment. Below it, a smiling, almost too perfect face, a generic stock photo really, exuded an air of trustworthiness. The company name, Serenity Financial Solutions, sounded legitimate enough. My initial reaction was a dismissive chuckle. Another one of these, I thought. We see them all the time. Promises of quick wealth, often targeting the vulnerable or the desperate. I was about to crumple it and toss it into the nearest bin when something made me pause. It was the address, not some anonymous P.O. box or a fancy downtown skyscraper, but a familiar building just a few blocks from my own home, a quiet office park that housed small businesses, dentists, and a local accounting firm. That struck me as odd. Most of these high-yield investment schemes operate from the shadows, or at least from a distance. This one felt uncomfortably close. My curiosity, a persistent trait that has often led me down fascinating and sometimes challenging paths, was immediately piqued. I am not an investor, not in the traditional sense anyway. My work, as you know, revolves around stories, around peeling back layers to reveal the truth. So my interest was not in their supposed returns, but in the sheer audacity of operating such a scheme so openly, so locally. I decided, right then and there, that I would keep the flyer. It felt like a breadcrumb, an invitation to a mystery. The next day, that breadcrumb led me to a casual conversation with an old friend, Maria. She runs the local coffee shop, a real hub of community gossip and genuine connection. We were talking about the usual neighborhood happenings, the upcoming bake sale, the new park renovations, when she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Her elderly aunt, a sweet woman named Elena, who had worked hard her entire life as a seamstress, had recently put a significant portion of her retirement savings into something called Serenity Financial Solutions. Maria was worried. Elena had been unusually secretive about it, only mentioning it after Maria had pressed her about why she was suddenly talking about exotic cruises and early retirement. The details Elena provided were vague, full of buzzwords about diversified portfolios and guaranteed interest rates, but Maria had a gut feeling that something was off. Hearing that name, Serenity Financial Solutions, from Maria, it was like a jolt. The flyer in my pocket suddenly felt heavy, charged with a new, unsettling significance. This wasn't just a generic scam trying to ensnare anonymous victims. This was personal. This was happening to people I knew, people in our community. Elena was not some faceless victim. She was a kind, gentle soul who deserved to enjoy her golden years, not have them jeopardized by predatory opportunists. That is when my curiosity transformed into something more resolute, more urgent. This was no longer just an interesting story idea. This was an investigation, a mission to protect our neighbors. I told Maria about the flyer, about my initial dismissive reaction, and then about the chill that ran down my spine when she mentioned Elena. We agreed that something needed to be done. Maria, bless her heart, was already gathering what little information Elena had reluctantly shared. It was a starting point, a very small one, but a starting point nonetheless. My first real step was the most obvious one, a deep dive into the internet. In this digital age, even the most clandestine operations leave a footprint, however faint. I started with the company name Serenity Financial Solutions. The initial search results were, predictably, a mixed bag. There was a legitimate-looking website, professionally designed, featuring stock photos of smiling, diverse individuals shaking hands in sunlit offices. It boasted impressive testimonials, vague descriptions of their investment strategies, and contact information. The language was boilerplate, full of financial jargon intended to sound sophisticated and reassuring, but ultimately saying very little of substance. Think phrases like innovative wealth management, bespoke financial planning, and unparalleled client satisfaction. It all felt a bit too perfect, a little too polished. I then broadened my search, looking for reviews, news articles, or any mentions of Serenity Financial Solutions that weren't directly from their own marketing materials. This is where things started to get interesting and concerning. There were a few positive comments on obscure financial forums, short, enthusiastic posts from newly minted investors praising the company's quick returns, but then, interspersed among them, were the whispers. A couple of forum threads hinting at delayed payouts, unanswered calls, and a general sense of unease. Nothing concrete, nothing that screamed fraud, but enough to raise an eyebrow, enough to fuel my growing suspicion. These were not direct accusations, mind you, but rather questions, doubts, anxieties from people who had entrusted their money to Serenity. One post, in particular, caught my attention. It was from a user named Concerned Citizen, who wrote simply, "Has anyone else had trouble getting their principal back from Serenity Financial? My emails are going unanswered." That was a red flag, a very clear one. I also looked into the individual names listed on the website. The CEO was a man named Arthur Finch. The website presented him as a seasoned financial expert with decades of experience, a philanthropist, and a pillar of the community. His photo, again, was a professionally shot headshot, radiating confidence and competence. I cross-referenced his name with various financial regulatory databases. Nothing. No licenses, no registrations with the SEC, no FINRA membership. That was a massive alarm bell. Any legitimate investment firm, especially one promising high returns, would be regulated, would have clear public records of its licensing and compliance. The absence of such records for Arthur Finch and Serenity Financial Solutions was not just suspicious, it was damning. It suggested that they were operating outside the legal framework designed to protect investors. Next, I turned my attention to the physical address listed on the flyer and the website. The office park itself was unremarkable, a cluster of modern, low-rise buildings with ample parking. I drove by one afternoon, trying to be inconspicuous. The building housing Serenity Financial Solutions had a modest sign by the entrance, just their logo and name, blending in perfectly with the other businesses. It was not flashy, not ostentatious, which in a way made it more insidious. It projected an image of quiet professionalism, of stability, of being just another legitimate local business. This calculated normalcy was a crucial part of their deception. They were not hiding in plain sight. They were thriving in plain sight, leveraging the trust that comes with being a perceived local establishment. I observed the office for about an hour. People came and went. Some looked like typical office workers, others like potential clients. Older individuals mostly, carrying briefcases or large handbags. It was hard to tell who was who, but the steady flow of people suggested that business was indeed active. This was not a ghost office. It was a functioning operation, which only deepened my concern. My next step involved connecting with others who might have information. I reached out to a few local journalists I knew, casually mentioning Serenity Financial Solutions. None of them had heard anything specific, but a couple expressed mild interest, promising to keep an ear out. It was not the immediate breakthrough I had hoped for, but it was important to plant those seeds. You never know where information will sprout from. I also started compiling a timeline of their operations. The website domain registration indicated it had been active for about 2 years. The earliest positive forum posts dated back about 18 months. This suggested a relatively new operation, but one that had been quietly building momentum. This timing was also critical. Newer scams often pay out early investors with money from later investors to build credibility, a classic Ponzi scheme characteristic. If they had been operating for 18 months, they would have had enough time to establish a reputation, lure in more substantial investments, and then, potentially, pull the rug out from under everyone. My conversations with Maria continued, providing more fragments of Elena's experience. Elena had initially invested a smaller sum, a test amount, and had indeed received a very prompt and impressive payout, exactly as promised. This initial success, this feeling of having made a smart decision, had then led her to invest a much larger sum, a significant chunk of her life savings. This is a common tactic in these schemes. Hook them with a small win, then reel them in for the big one. Elena described meetings at the Serenity Financial Solutions office, always with Arthur Finch himself, or sometimes with a charming young woman who introduced herself as his assistant, Sarah. They were always impeccably dressed, polite, and brimming with confidence. They spoke in soothing tones, assuring Elena that her money was safe, growing steadily, and that her future was secure. Elena, trusting and eager for a comfortable retirement, had fallen completely under their spell. She genuinely believed she had found a golden opportunity. The emotional toll on Elena was already evident, even before any concrete confirmation of fraud. Maria told me that Elena had started to become agitated, checking her online account with Serenity Financial multiple times a day, noticing that while the balance continued to grow on paper, the option to withdraw her principal or even a significant portion of her gains seemed to be consistently unavailable or met with technical issues. When she tried to call, she was often put on hold indefinitely or told that Arthur Finch was in a meeting. The excuses were becoming more frequent, more elaborate. This was the classic pattern of a scam collapsing in on itself. This emotional aspect, the human cost, fueled my resolve even further. This wasn't just about exposing a financial crime. It was about protecting people like Elena, people who had worked hard their entire lives and were now facing the terrifying prospect of losing everything. It was about community protection, about standing up against those who prey on trust and vulnerability. I decided my next step needed to be more direct. I needed to see Serenity Financial Solutions from the inside, to experience their sales pitch firsthand. I needed to become a potential client. This was a risky move, but I felt it was necessary to gather direct evidence and understand their operational tactics. I crafted a persona, a plausible backstory. I was a small business owner, recently sold a small share of my company, looking to invest a modest sum, nothing too outlandish but enough to be taken seriously. I wanted to see how they operated, what promises they made, and how they handled potential investors. I scheduled an appointment through their website, using a burner phone and an anonymous email address. The response was prompt and courteous. They offered me a slot later that week with Arthur Finch himself. That surprised me. I had expected to be shunted off to an assistant, but it seemed Arthur was still very much involved in the sales process, especially for new clients. This could be a good sign for my investigation, potentially giving me direct access to the man at the top. The day of the appointment arrived. I dressed conservatively, trying to project an air of quiet professionalism and a hint of financial stability. As I walked into the Serenity Financial Solutions office, the first thing that struck me was the atmosphere. It was calm, almost serene, exactly as their name suggested. Soft music played subtly in the background. The reception area was tastefully decorated, modern art on the walls, comfortable leather chairs, and a selection of financial magazines neatly arranged on a coffee table. It was designed to exude an aura of success, stability, and trustworthiness. The air smelled faintly of expensive coffee and something vaguely floral. A young woman, likely Sarah, Arthur Finch's assistant, greeted me with a warm smile. She was impeccably dressed, her hair perfectly styled, and her demeanor professional yet friendly. She offered me coffee or water, and I politely declined. My heart was thumping a little faster than usual. This was a direct encounter, a step into the lion's den, so to speak. I reminded myself to stay observant, to listen carefully, and to ask probing questions without revealing my true intentions. After a short wait, Sarah led me to Arthur Finch's office. It was spacious, with a large mahogany desk, a couple of plush client chairs, and a window overlooking the quiet office park. On the walls were framed certificates, although from a distance I couldn't make out their details, and a few tasteful landscape paintings. A large, expensive-looking desktop computer sat on his desk, its screen displaying what looked like complex financial charts. It was all designed to impress, to convey authority and expertise. Arthur Finch himself rose to greet me. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, with a full head of silver hair impeccably combed. He wore a tailored suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced and reassuring. He had an air of quiet confidence, a certain gravitas that, I had to admit, was quite disarming. He looked exactly like the kind of person you would trust with your life savings. This was not some back-alley con artist. This was a polished, sophisticated operator. He gestured for me to sit, and we exchanged pleasantries. He asked about my background, my business, my financial goals. I stuck to my prepared script, talking about wanting to grow my capital, seeking stable returns, and being wary of volatile markets. He listened attentively, nodding occasionally, making eye contact that felt genuine, almost paternal. He made me feel heard, understood. It was a masterclass in building rapport. Then he launched into his pitch. He spoke smoothly, confidently, explaining Serenity Financial Solutions' unique approach to investment. He used terms like proprietary algorithms, diversified global portfolios, and risk mitigation strategies. He showed me charts on his computer screen, graphs depicting steady, upward trends. He emphasized their consistent track record, their commitment to client satisfaction, and their ethical approach. He claimed they had developed a method that virtually eliminated risk, while still delivering above-average returns. Specifically, he promised a guaranteed annual return of 12%, paid out monthly. 12% guaranteed. That number, in today's financial climate, was astronomical. It was a clear red flag, a beacon flashing too good to be true. Legitimate investments with such high returns always come with significant risk, and nothing is ever truly guaranteed. I asked about the specifics of their investment strategy. He became slightly less detailed, speaking in broader terms about private equity, emerging markets, and strategic partnerships. When I pressed for more granular information, for example, which specific private equity funds they invested in, or the names of their strategic partners, he artfully dodged the questions, saying that their proprietary methods were confidential, a trade secret that protected their competitive edge. He assured me, however, that all investments were fully secured and insured. When I asked about the insurance provider, he again became vague, mentioning a syndicate of international insurers, but provided no names or policy details. I also inquired about their regulatory compliance. He confidently stated that they operated under a specialized exemption for private investment vehicles, implying that they were beyond the purview of typical financial regulations because they dealt with a select clientele. This was a classic tactic used by unregistered investment schemes to sidestep scrutiny. In reality, such exemptions are rare and highly specific, and certainly would not apply to a firm openly soliciting investments from the general public. Throughout our conversation, he maintained a calm, reassuring demeanor. He never pressured me, never pushed for an immediate decision. Instead, he offered to send me a detailed prospectus and encouraged me to take my time, to do my due diligence. He even suggested I speak to some of their existing clients, although he never offered specific names, only saying he could arrange testimonials upon request. This measured approach was designed to foster trust, to make me believe he was genuinely looking out for my best interests, not just trying to close a sale. As I left his office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was appalled by the blatant deception. the carefully constructed facade designed to lure unsuspecting individuals. On the other, I understood how incredibly effective it was. Arthur Finch was a master manipulator, a charmer who could make even the most skeptical person question their own doubts. His performance was convincing, polished, and utterly devoid of genuine substance. Every answer, every gesture, was calculated to instill confidence and deflect scrutiny. Back in my car, I immediately began typing notes into my phone, trying to capture every detail of our conversation, every phrase he used, every evasive answer. The prospectus he gave me was thick and glossy, filled with more jargon and impressive-looking charts, but upon closer inspection, it contained no verifiable financial statements, no audited reports, and no concrete information about their actual investments. It was a beautifully packaged, empty promise. My next step was to verify the information Arthur Finch had provided, or, more accurately, the lack thereof. I spent hours cross-referencing every claim, every subtle hint he had dropped. The specialized exemption he mentioned? Non-existent for a firm operating as they were. The international syndicate of insurers? Impossible to trace without specific names. The proprietary algorithms? A black box, completely untraceable. Everything pointed to a carefully constructed illusion. I also began to explore the network around Arthur Finch. Who were the other people involved? The charming assistant, Sarah, for instance. A quick search revealed very little about her online, just a LinkedIn profile with a generic job description at Serenity Financial Solutions. It was almost as if she had no digital footprint before joining the company. This kind of anonymity, or rather digital invisibility, is often a hallmark of individuals involved in fraudulent schemes. They try to keep a low profile to avoid being linked to their illicit activities. My investigation then moved to a more public realm, but still under the radar. I started attending local community events, farmers markets, neighborhood gatherings. I wanted to see if Serenity Financial had any visible presence, or if their influence permeated the social fabric in a less direct way. My initial thought was to spot employees, perhaps see Finch himself in a casual setting. What I found was more insidious. At a local artisan fair, tucked between a candle maker and a bespoke jewelry stall, was a sleek, minimalist booth. No Serenity Financial branding, just a tasteful banner that read Future Path Financial Planning. They offered free financial wellness checkups, no obligation. The people staffing it were young, impeccably dressed, and exuded an almost unnerving calm. I recognized one of them from the Serenity Financial lobby, a junior analyst named Mark. He was engaging an elderly couple, his voice a low, reassuring murmur. I watched him subtly guide them towards a sign-up sheet for a free seminar, promising insights into securing retirement. It was a classic recruitment funnel, disguised as community outreach. I signed up myself, using a burner email and a fictitious